Hey guys, the world you lived in overnight had several monsters suddenly appearing. Now humans and monsters have engaged in a sort of war, but with time passing, they managed to coexist by establishing a cultivation school. By getting into it, you could become the strongest man in the world to protect it. However, our protagonist was humiliated day and night by everyone because he lacked cultivation talents. His cultivation was nothing. Even if he wasn't worth anything, he didn't want to give up. At this point, he starts training. And out of nowhere, he achieves 10,000k refinement. While to become the strongest man in the world, you only needed 999k strength. Not everyone at the school achieved this power, though. But let's rewind a bit to understand things better. On a normal day at school, our protagonist, like any other day, was doing some squats. After finishing them, he needed to figure out his K level, but as he counted this and that thing starts rising, surpassing 999. Upon doing this, the thing starts beeping, and a small explosion occurs, tearing all his clothes. Yet, he's disappointed again, thinking it could be something broken or fake. However, he considers that maybe it could only measure up to 999k refinement. Just as he's pondering, someone tries to open the door. The person manages to enter, starting to talk to him. He always kept breaking those collars, although those collars were a bit expensive, causing him to almost be expelled from that school, but he always found a way, and even she said that if she wasn't there, he wouldn't even be in that school anymore. However, here she stands, and at the moment she is quite surprised to see that the whole place where our hero was completely destroyed. She even asks our protagonist what kind of training he was doing there. Ignoring this, she comments on what level our protagonist could already be. He mentions it's the same as before, but there the collar tells our protagonist that he might have reached level 10,000 of refinement of K or something like that. She then starts out of nowhere, and our protagonist is somewhat taken aback, but she only adds that our protagonist is still at the basic level of normal refinement. However, she continues to explain that even if our protagonist can't evolve there, it was still a huge evolution. The things he noted were part of something that would allow them to evolve more in the future, because next month there will be a martial arts test at the university, and if our protagonist passes the foundation period, he can enroll in a martial arts university in the near future. That's good, but she feels a bit down to find out that people from other schools or universities were at a much higher level than him. Moreover, to get in, he needs to be strong because at a certain point, where they are, the monsters in this world have become much stronger than they were before. Furthermore, if they couldn't get several strong people to fight these monsters, their university kind of found out that they could almost go back to prehistory, and if things didn't change, they could live like this for 50 years. So, entering the prehistoric era wouldn't be a good thing. Things get more dangerous as the monsters become much stronger, their levels surpass those of the living. People won't deal with these monsters alone, so it's possible to change everything. It just needs the people from this university to become stronger than they were last year. The importance of enrolling in a martial arts university was much greater. He understands and asks her to leave first, which she does. As she leaves, we see our protagonist there, a little disappointed to know that there's only 1 month left. If he doesn't manage to reach the foundation period, he won't be able to participate in the event and won't be able to join a university. At this point, something appears on his screen. It was a message. It was something our hero had posted online some time ago, just a few tips on some important matters. 10 minutes later, he realizes that no one has managed to solve it yet. Even more disappointed, he starts thinking of a good way to solve it. However, he considers that even reaching the 10th level of refinement stage might give him a base to start some things. The cultivation can't be changed from the way it started, so if something is going wrong, it means something went wrong. While thinking about this, he accidentally drops his phone and notices that the spiritual energy in his body was really increasing. However, he couldn't quite move it throughout his whole body. He wonders how that's possible, but then he thinks it might be like a sieve. He hears an announcement that all students should gather at the martial arts field, and everyone rushes there. There, they all start running, with one person running faster than everyone else. The red-haired guy. He asks everyone to get out of his way because he wants to meet someone first. Even using only 10% of his strength, he could defeat everyone here for no reason. He starts running but passes by our protagonist, who stares at him for a minute before stopping in front of him. He starts saying that maybe he's the former number 1 of this school, our sullen one, and he realized he's a waste to be here. However, our protagonist just laughs and finds him a little stupid. This irritates the red-haired guy because he's not sad about this reaction and what he said. However, our protagonist asks him what he wants from him, to which he doesn't respond. He thinks that last time, the compliments he gave to this guy weren't enough, so he thinks that giving him a beating would solve the issue. The girls in the background start thinking that this guy might have some masochistic tendencies or something similar, making him even more irritated. But to make him even more annoyed, a blonde guy suddenly appears next to his ear and starts saying that he just found out our protagonist's secret, that he's still at key refinement level 1, the most basic of all. Upon discovering this, he starts mocking our protagonist, saying that besides being a waste, he's now a failure. He then announces to everyone that our protagonist is still at the chi refinement stage, and we already see people who had previously seen the protagonist with admiration now looking at him with disappointment. A person who should be following an example ends up sort of second-guessing before thinking that our protagonist was too nice, since now that he's ruined his reputation, he will also ruin our Rastas. For he always thinks our big guy thinks he's a bit superior to him. But what motivates this guy so much to want to mess up our prota was simple. The teachers used to praise this guy, but after being beaten up by our MC, he ended up kind of seeing that the people around him started to value his power less, thinking he should train a little more to be able to reach our protagonist. And the girl he had so much passion for wanted to declare her love for him, ended up turning her back on this guy, saying that someone who was so inferior to our protagonist didn't deserve her love. So, she rejects this guy. The dude gets mad and suddenly pops up next to our protagonist, and he starts saying that he was not only less valued by the girl he likes so much, but also by the teachers. Our PR just says that this was an act of his own strength, and besides, what did that have to do with our protagonist, leaving him even more furious with our MC, bursting with anger. He unleashes his hack and now goes all out on our protagonist, but our big guy ends up using his shield, which here ends up defending himself from one of his attacks. The punch ends up hitting his hand, but with just one move back, our protagonist managed to defend himself, as well as not only defend himself, he managed to drag that guy away just a little bit. He falls hard on the ground, his subordinate already sticks to his side, trying to understand what happened, but now that he has defeated someone who is perhaps superior to him, he ends up thinking that yes, he has evolved, that those who still wanted to keep picking on our guy end up getting up. He says he will sue our protagonist for sort of beating up the guy again, and now that he had evidence, things got a little messed up for him, but he stops and says no one even saw him, he didn't even move. He even had evidence the guys who were watching the whole fight didn't even see our protagonist moving. So our protagonist from here on just simply leaves this place with a thought in mind that he should already be going to the martial arts training field, maybe there the teachers have some answer to what he needs to improve, what happened to him there, but he leaves it to find out later. He ends up going to that place where those people call him, he then goes along with several people like that, he arrives at the palace or arrives at that palace, our protagonist walking around there, our protagonist ends up finding our bald junior who here introduces himself as a certain teacher from the 3rd class. But however this teacher already asks our protagonist how the things went there that he did to evolve. He said everything was going well, however the things happened like this. Then he asks if he could take a look at our protagonist to see what happened with our ready, so it is done. He ended up using a cultivation of his that allows him to see what evolved most in our protagonist, so it is done. By doing this, our bald ends up thinking what happened, our prota just ended up sort of emanating energy a little more superior than his. But even if he achieved so much power that surpasses himself, he doesn't understand why our protagonist is at the basic K refining stage. But for the PMS to know that he couldn't get out of that basic K refining stage, he ends up asking the bald, which was good but not that much, but now he realizes. He asks and becomes afraid to know that this caused him to lose a little more hair, but he throws something he was holding in his hand at our protagonist's face and just said that this had nothing to do with what he thought, just messing with our big guy to go to the patio. So he goes, but before he can leave, our Calveo ends up giving him some motivation. These motivations were basic. He should be leading the way there, and maybe he would change his future if he managed to find something. Otherwise, he just shouldn't give up, eventually, he would get something. Also, he starts saying that after this creme is finished, that competition will begin, and our protagonist might participate in that, and he should already be prepared. So he says this to the old Calvo, but he ends up interrupting our protagonist by putting his hand on his shoulder, but here again, he is interrupted by our protagonist who still hasn't answered the question of what level of layer he has reached. As Calva didn't want to know the answer, our protagonist just throws 10,000 there. The one who already had no hair ends up almost losing it, but his hair didn't all fall out completely because an explosion happened next to them, which caught their attention a lot. So they run in that direction. Running, they end up realizing that a director ended up kind of being hit by that, but someone who can cause that kind of damage to her had to be in a very high constellation state. Our protagonist is surprised, who would be this crazy person? But from there, a light appears calling everyone's attention, and while everyone's attention from there is called by that mysterious light from another place, we already see two guards. One of them was almost sleeping while the other was giving a brotherly hit on the other, but that thing wouldn't go on anymore because behind him, the whole gathering of extras already appeared. They cause, but the guard who was there in the background asks why they were there, but this guy doesn't answer with a slap. He just sinks the face of one of the extras into the ground, so he got scared with that, and at this point, he runs with his hand towards one of the cell phones that was lying nearby, but it didn't help at all because someone behind him ended up picking up the rocks and threw a big F at him. While those extras start walking in a straight direction ahead, while those there were having fun, there was another place. We can see this director. He is a director of a school there, but people butter up to the guy because he can fly. However, to fly on this sword here, you need to have a pretty high cultivation. But the guy interrupts his chats because something needed to be taken care of first. This thing was that director. She ends up saying something there, but there was no time to say it completely. She ends up fainting. As soon as she fainted, this old man asks them to take her so she can be taken care of by other people for a little while, but the crime of the 100-day pass test, the test of the next kingdom, ends up being sort of finished here. They won't be able to complete this from now on. Furthermore, they end up getting annoyed with this situation. They spend days and days training. As a result, they couldn't go on with this. So he knows that these guys wouldn't accept just any excuses for this. He ends up asking everyone to be quiet, and here he begins to explain that one of the guys from a quite powerful organization appeared at this school, and they were around here wanting to cause a party to everyone. So after, they were pretty tangled up. If they didn't want to go along with their craziness, they'd have to fight against those guys, which got everyone stirred up. People started running back and forth. But then out of nowhere behind our protagonist, someone touches him. Before he can think, he wonders if these guys are dangerous because they're loose, but she just grabs his hand and pushes him into a completely hidden spot away from the others. There, she grabs something hidden behind her, a wanted poster. Our protagonist now had a mission. If he manages to capture each of the guys on this poster, he'll be getting the attention of the big shots. If he succeeds, he won't have to struggle as much to get a title he wants so badly without suffering so much. But he wonders where she got this from. She just says she got it from a reliable source. Plus, it would bring in some good money for our protagonist, and he could kind of get into the same college as her. But that wasn't something he started to look into or like. He just tossed the poster aside and said he wouldn't do it, leaving her frustrated. She throws it on the ground and stomps on it. Meanwhile, from another place, we can see someone calling for a teacher. This was our Calveo, running in that direction, where that extra who got beaten up by our protagonist for the second time was. Finding this out, he grabs and mounts on his sword. Now, riding the sword, the kid flies. Meanwhile, in another place, we can already see that brute alongside his extras. They had a mission, to rough up some people. However, to do that, they needed to overcome some obstacles, and one of them was some teachers. So, they'll have their little pets here whose goal is to defeat the teachers. But unfortunately, if he fails for the second time here, he won't have a good end. So, he tells everyone to scram, and they do, while those there begin their plans. In another location, in the dormitory, we see our protagonist doing his public agent thing again, trying to explain what was happening to him. He just wanted answers. While he was thinking about what would happen, for the first time, he gets a response. The person who responds doesn't believe it either, but he affirms it again, saying he had 10,000 refinement points of K. The guy doesn't believe him, but he kind of explains that if he really manages to have that, he'll just be lucky. He basically possesses the basic K storage inside him, so he can have as much strength as he wants, but his refinement level of K will never level up. The person outside won't see his rank going up. It's like a USS. But furthermore, he asks our prota to stop talking about this because it's impossible. So, he asks him to focus on the exam he wanted to take on his day. Plus, he should focus on that instead of posting things on social media. He ends up closing his social network and leaving, saying to himself that nobody would believe him anyway, so why bother asking. As he walks away, he ends up passing by some guy there who was staring at him. But if Proto here never saw this guy before, he ends up thinking they probably just had to go. The guy accidentally put his hand on his neck, covering his tattoo. He ended up asking the boy if he happened to see that on his neck. Not understanding what he said, the boy just replied that he saw it accidentally. So, it meant that our protagonist had to stand up for himself right there. He let out all the courage he had and then, unfortunately, as he had no choice, he had to confront the guy head on. He went all out against him, not caring what was happening, but as he approached him, he could see the tattoo near his neck. It was the kind of logo of that family invading the school. So, he simply knew he needed to defeat it. But as he saw this guy coming at him with a punch, thinking he would land a hit on him, he just dodged his move, causing the punch to generate a shockwave, trembling everything and even breaking a wall behind our protagonist. He was surprised by the damage that occurred, but the guy was ready to throw our protagonist, Jeff, once and for all. He said that our protagonist was lucky to defend himself last time but not this time. However, our protagonist activated his hack, preventing the guy's attack from hitting him entirely. Still, unable to land a hit, the guy pushed forward, but he lacked strength. His own hand was pushed back, receiving a surprise punch in the face from our protagonist. After pushing him back, he thought the refinement of our protagonist's kid was on another level. None of the powerful people in this place would be recognized as having such power. Our protagonist's power was far superior, but he believed this boy could still be defeated. So, he ripped his clothes, declaring he wouldn't pretend anymore and would go all out against our protagonist. He fully activated his hack to confirm he would defeat our protagonist. After doing so, he went all out against our protagonist, saying it was impossible to escape. But the punch he threw at our protagonist didn't even hit him. Approaching him, he wondered what was happening. His spiritual energy wasn't working as it should. He started feeling strange things. At this point, he could also feel the guy's spiritual energy and understood that our protagonist was much more superior. However, at this point, our protagonist wanted to do the same thing as him. He threw a punch at the guy, and with just one punch, he sent him flying against the wall. Our protagonist stood there, looking at him. He couldn't believe that with just one punch, he managed to defeat the guy. Now, as he thought about how to explain this to others who were on his side or allies, that he defeated a guy 10 times stronger than him, he remembered the guy's words about having stored a lot of energy in his body. But he thought that his opponent also had the same amount of power or even more. However, he ended up taking some kind of medication, which could serve as a good excuse, like he had a heart attack, and no one was there to help him. It was a good idea, and he could easily get away with it. At that moment, he also thought he shouldn't leave this guy here. If someone saw him lying on the ground, they might suspect something. So, he grabbed the guy by the heads and starts dragging through this school. While dragging him from another place, we can see our bald mounted on top of his sword. Still, he explains everything that happened, and for a brief moment, he is quite surprised by the cultivator who was fighting against him because the cultivator who defeated him was strong. But he ends up stopping, handing over to this chubby guy a pill so that he could recover a little faster. As soon as he recovered, he asked this chubby guy to explain only to him a little of what just happened to him. So, recovering, he explains that it was not possible because the guy who fought didn't even have a chance to deal with him. He was fast and much stronger. If he saw he was against the wall, and at the moment, he ended up realizing that the guy didn't know how to explain anything that was happening but lost more than me. He ends up remembering that in this place, there were some cameras, so he should go up to the 3rd floor where maybe he could find out what happened. But to end his joy, ends up appearing holding, saying that who literally ruined him against the wall was our pro, and he was a guy who would receive a punishment. So he said yes, he would be looking at the cameras, would see the damage that our pro did to this kid. He ends up taking this, our little red, along with him to a place I don't know a little safer. As soon as he leaves that place, someone from there already appears in the background, calling our bald junior, who here seeing the presence of that person realizes that there was something very important, changing attention very quickly. But here trying to disguise what was happening, being now a little while ago, he ends up being interrupted. They who appeared here end up saying this bald Dekraya that a mission there that before was level until low rose to ranker. This means that it will need many high-level people to face those people who were trying to invade this school, but he totally ignores this stop at this moment. He goes to the monitoring room where there he ends up thinking about what problem our protagonist just created, and maybe he would be the second best of this school or maybe he is the last, but his expectation ends up not even going up because there he ended up kind of seeing that happened. Our pro didn't even move. And right there he managed to drag that guy against the pair of Lemies. But he also realizes that our prota has already managed to reach the third level of foundation construction. This challenge between levels of our prota evolving more and more surprising him quite, but a cross-level challenge refers to the repeated explosion of spiritual energy that will cause breathing to reach its critical point. Maybe what he used to fight that fat guy before was to use this stop, and that was enough to send that TR race up, but he from here ended up realizing that our protagonist's talent was limitless, so they didn't need to find a very good way to make our protagonist enter that martial arts university, he just needed to make him enter there. But while thinking of a good method to make him enter there, above him, we can see a strange kid in his mouth. He held a machete but that emitted a glow, making that glow hit the monitors. The old bald ends up noticing this glow, but the boy ends up jumping on him. But he was smart, he ends up using a cultivation of his. With that cultivation he throws up, but the boy was not stupid, he uses his machete to defend himself. But the machete he used was quite weak, that machete is broken, and the boy is dragged back here. He ends up thinking that bald was not weak, no, when thinking that a simple guy who took care of camera monitoring was strong, but he there ends up not even talking to that thing, but he ends up finding out that this guy was part of that organization there that was invading that school, since now it was worth. He fights with all his might as he rushes towards our bald, now determined to put an end to him. He wouldn't stay still either. He then activates his cultivation technique and also moves towards him, defending against all his moves. Another attack almost catches him, but he defends himself. However, this wasn't enough. That bald head reflects too much, so he decides to deal with it. He throws a punch at our bald, but he's powerful. He grabs the boy's arm with his left hand and cultivates a strike there. Only he manages to fully hit the boy. Now hitting him, he throws him away, and he crashes into the wall. Some ketchup comes out of his mouth and falls to the ground, just the powder left. Now he sees that he shouldn't have underestimated a bald. The creature was much more powerful than him. Realizing he couldn't win, he reaches into his pocket and takes out some smoke bombs. The old man wouldn't allow him to escape, but the creature was too fast. He throws them on the ground, declaring that he hasn't given up yet, he'll try again in the future. As the smoke rises, the boy simply escapes. He realizes he needs to inform the people working at this school as quickly as possible that the guys invading it are basically wearing the same clothes as the normal students. Meanwhile, in the dormitory, those guys are wondering why Eng hasn't returned yet. He was just out for a walk. The other speculates that maybe he's been discovered and dragged off somewhere. He tells him to shut his foul mouth and that he won't be caught so easily. Tired of waiting, he decides to go look for his friend. As he leaves and closes the door, he boasts about reaching the golden elixir, so no opponent at this school would be a problem. He starts walking around the school and is pleasantly surprised when he sees his companion being dragged by someone in a hood. As he watches his companion being dragged away, he wonders who this person is. He hides and starts thinking that perhaps our guy there, Vogo, could be using him to claim the reward for his head or just to show everyone that he caught one of these guys. He hides even more and decides to be more careful. Our MC defeated W, a guy even stronger than him, and if he advanced now, he would basically be defeated. So, he should think twice before acting, but stopping for a moment, he ends up picking something from inside his clothes. It was a revolver. This thing was a spiritual weapon developed by a guy who considered himself the strongest person he had ever met in his life, so he had confidence that yes, with this spiritual weapon, he could be at his best and he could easily end this guy. So now he ends up deciding to jump to the side, definitely putting our protagonist in a winning position, and he will be turning our boy into pieces. So, he ends up appearing there, and after appearing, he ends up pulling the trigger. Doing this, people who were outside and inside end up hearing the noise of that thing, but that bullet ends up heading towards him. He grins, a somewhat macabre smile, but that bullet that was about to hit him ends up hitting his hood instead, then just going straight to the ground. He stops and after that, he removes his hood and here he ends up realizing that something hit him. The one who kneels ends up going down. Then he picks up that thing on the ground. Here he realizes that this thing looked basically like iron, but while he tried to figure out what it was, in another completely unknown place, we can already see some people. These people are those teachers. Among these teachers was our Calveo, showing to this guy everything that was happening, and including that evil organization was already in this school, going crazy there, doing that. He ended up having the luck to meet one and found out that these guys decided to opt for disguising themselves as ordinary students of this school, so they should just be more careful. However, while thinking about this, the old man ends up seeing a shadow of someone strange, so he asks that thing to reveal itself. While thinking about revealing itself, he already had a cultivation in his hand to beat this person, but who appears there literally is our Y-Zone, our protagonist's girlfriend, who simply didn't want to be with her. She simply leaves the scene. After leaving the scene, she starts saying that she only came here to this place just to see our protagonist, but here they start to understand that she literally threw our protagonist in the middle of several extras so that they could fight against our but not. She just says there that our protagonist simply wanted to go to his. They're all in their dorm room, but they don't believe her. This one already wanted to go in there to help our protagonist. Besides, there was one of his students inside, and he wouldn't allow one of his students to get hurt by some extras. However, another person asks him not to advance naturally because there was a quite dangerous organization inside, their level being quite high, but those guys inside were just a little stronger than him. The school's director stood in the background observing, but he runs ahead of him and stops, saying he wouldn't allow this teacher to risk his life so much. So he simply told him to wait because he and his guards beside him wouldn't allow him to advance alone. This one pulls out his knife and almost slashes the other there for causing such trouble. But they end up going straight into that school. Once inside the school, we can see that guy who shot our protagonist, but that bullet that hit our protagonist hit the ground again. He picked it up and wondered what it was. At that moment, he realized that our protagonist didn't even want to defeat. He asked what this was, and at that moment, he realized that our protagonist didn't even want to defeat him because he was playing around. His aura was somewhat intimidating. He couldn't even move anymore, and he didn't want to die at this moment. His sneaky attack, which he had tried all his life, failed miserably. Now, unfortunately, he would meet a torturous end at the hands of our protagonist. Our protagonist wondered who this strange guy was. He thought this guy was less valuing our protagonist. Moreover, the slap he gave on his thigh was to make him run, so he would do what he was asked. But before that, he grabs that bullet and holds onto it for a bit. Then he says he couldn't defeat this guy but would never accept being defeated so easily by this extra. So now he prepares with that bullet in hand. He simply holds onto it and then releases it, and that thing speeds towards him. He couldn't move, so he was hit squarely by that thing. He wondered what he had done, but he questioned if that guy was okay or if something happened to him since he suddenly fell flat. Not just him but also the other guy. Now they wonder what our protagonist was doing. He was seen as the weakest guy, but now he defeated two guys who were superior to everyone in that school. What would he do to get out of this? Suddenly, he sees that gun, that .38 left by that extra who fell flat. Our protagonist didn't think twice. He ran towards that thing, grabbed it in his hand, now holding the .38. Our hero thinks this thing will be enough to defend against anything. While he thinks about this, elsewhere, we see that extra with a look of surprise. He was surprised by the defeat of his two companions. He still couldn't believe this was possible. At this moment, he thinks he should go after him because, in his mind, our boy hasn't tired yet. He wants to try his luck. But then he pulls out the RCK, only to hear a noise from some voice saying there were people or a student up there. So they run to help the guy running too because he didn't want to be caught. While running, our big boy hides the .38. Now he thinks someone is coming, maybe the principal, and he should be more careful because people might mistake our protagonist for a member of that organization. So he stops and comes up with a brilliant idea. He puts one of the extras next to the other, making them look like they were fighting. He thinks this will ensure they were there, defeated, until the end of the fight. But at that moment, at the entrance, one of the directors appears, seeing all this. Seeing this, he wonders what our protagonist was doing to disguise himself. He starts to laugh, but from the window, someone jumps. The one who jumped was the one who wanted to try his luck in capturing our protagonist. Falling to the ground, he turns, now starting to cast a spell out of nowhere. He puts his hand on the wall and starts saying words that only wizards could hear. So he thinks our protagonist, the directors, and extras will no longer be in his hands but in the hands of something worse than him. At this moment, he asks them to keep an eye on this period because things will get bad. From that location, from that portal, we see some strange things looking inside. But those strange things start to come out of that portal. 1K came out, but then it cut off. Taking a closer look, he sees the beauty from within, so he thinks he should enter. Meanwhile, we can see the teachers along with the others next to our protagonist, but our protagonist here did everything to not get caught. Furthermore, he ended up saying that the two were fighting, so it wasn't him who fought against him. This guy approaches those guys over there and realizes that our protagonist did a good thing, but he gives our MC a cold look. After this, he reveals that he is a RCK and spills everything he had. Thus, our MC thought he was caught, but near his ear there was something that those creatures had placed on our protagonist. So, finding out that our Silver wasn't the guy who defeated him, he thinks that our MC was the weaker one after all, unfortunate. But he asks him to stay on this side because he didn't want to see our protagonist getting screwed over. At this point, he puts his hand on the extra. He enjoyed something there, trying to find out who sent those two dragging him. Their bodies weren't modified, but on his arms he can see several marks and some medication that allowed him to stay awake, which might be the cause of his unfortunate end. However, the other had something there that left him more confused, but the guy who used that gun on this guy was from the Golden Core University or something much higher than that. So, he tries to find out the last thing. Yes, this was the guy who was part of the same organization as this was, so he ends up thinking he should find out more things about him. Thus, he would discover what these guys are motivated by to be entering this place for no reason. He tried to give some pills or do some cultivation, but unfortunately his high-quality techniques didn't work either. However, something caught his attention. It was a cube, and at that moment he picks up the cube. He discovers that if he manages to break the seal of that thing, he'll be able to find out the real main reason they're here. So, he hands this thing over to the professor so he could go to the lab to figure out how to break these things without activating self-destruction. But before he could hand it over to that guy, he accidentally drops it on the ground, and it rolls towards our protagonist. Seeing this thing close to him, our protagonist thinks about kicking it, and he does, but before he can touch it with a kick, the thing breaks completely. Everyone is surprised and sees the boy's power, but still doesn't believe he had that strength because our protagonist then says he didn't mean to, he accidentally broke it, and it was something important. But inside that, there was something. He then lifts that thing, saying it was a communicator. So, that director approaches our prota and ends up cultivating there. His cultivation allows him to show on the screen above the person who commands this whole group here. Thus, they discover the main reason those things were attacking this school is that they were going to be used as bait so the others could move towards one of their main towers. They were going to destroy everything there. So, as they discovered that there was something much higher in mind, it wasn't just about destroying this school but a main source of theirs. They needed to reinforce that more, and at this moment, he also thinks that these two kids below here were just used to disguise things. Could they be following along with the main plans? And yes, if the energy tower is destroyed, 60% of the school buildings will quickly lose their energy source. If that place were destroyed, the power inside it could be as big as a pretty atomic bomb. Fearful of this, he finally discovers his true motive. This true motive was to do this there. But at this moment, our protagonist emerges with his new question, asking if all they just saw in front of them was a complete lie to deceive them, but not for this, for him, wouldn't it be a mistake or a deception for them? If they got it wrong, their generations of cultivators would all come crashing down on them. So, at this point, he thinks he should think very carefully about the right and wrong things to do. After thinking for a bit, he grabs his phone with that in hand, trying to send a message to someone. However, the old man notices he has no signal, and the teachers there also have no signal. They don't understand what's happening. So, they try to run out of this place to find out what happened. But running and running, they end up reaching a point where they discover in the end that they have been caught by these guys, and they have finally been caught by them. At this moment, our protagonist wants to know something adventurous, but the guy doesn't allow it. He doesn't want one of his students wandering around and ending up meeting these guys. So, at this point, he asks him to leave this place and go somewhere else to find better things. It was a good choice because shortly after he leaves, something starts to emerge from that portal there. They don't understand what that hand was, but they are surprised when they return. The bodies that were stiff on the ground are no longer there, not even the dust remains. They try to understand what happened, but as soon as they realize the guy disappeared, they try to figure out what happened. They look back to see if they returned to the right place, but when they look forward, the directors and everyone else had disappeared. At this point, our protagonist grabs her hand, and when she sees her hand being held by our guy, she turns completely red, all smitten with our boy. She just wanted to meet them and be alone afterwards. Being alone was bad, but she only understood that she wanted to be alone with just the two of them. But being alone with just the two of them wasn't going to happen because on the ceiling, a lizard or something similar suddenly appears and opens its mouth, almost giving her a little bite. But our guy is quick. He pulls her to the side, tearing a piece of her skirt. But that wasn't enough. He needed to do something, or something bad would happen. So, he starts running with her because staying there would be bad. They run and enter a cramped room. Our guy finds something to lock the door. They end up locked inside, and our guy continues holding her hand. She continues holding the hand of our protagonist. Meanwhile, he tries to ask her what happened, but she says nothing. Only that in front of them, there was an opening, and the monster also found that opening and found him. The dinosaur, seeing them both slack-jawed, simply doesn't miss the opportunity. The beast grabs his hand, breaking that thing, which was enough to invade that place and grab our protagonist and our brunette girl next to him. She hugs him, but it's no use. The thing there would get both of them. But at this moment, our hero grabs his revolver that he had forgotten he had there. Grabbing it, he points it at that dinosaur. After he grabs that kind of gun he had in his hand, he points it at the dinosaur. With just one shot, he manages to make a small hole in the thing, successfully making that thing come crashing down. The beast falls dead on the ground, and he ends up telling her that he managed to defeat it. But she says, where did he find that thing, as it was very strong. Our guy just said he managed to find that thing somewhere for some reason. It was luck in his story that he had just mentioned when suddenly she starts stopping in front of this thing. Now, facing it, she begins to try to figure out what this thing was. She then, after pausing for a moment, discovers that this thing in front of her was a type of beast that only existed in the past. This was an ancient species of dragon, and she couldn't believe it. This monster they had just encountered was a monster that stood in front of the line. Our big guy also couldn't believe that this thing stood in front. However, this was a somewhat social kind of monster. If it appeared, it meant that others could also be there with it. So, they should be a bit more cautious. And this happened right at the door. Another snuck by and our protagonist saw it. But right there, she asks him to wait before he could leave and do something foolish because this monster seizes the most crucial moments to attack the opponent. But then, out of nowhere, looking at her, he realizes that something strange was happening. So, knowing she might be scared, he tells her she could relax. This monster that appeared wasn't because a danger had appeared worldwide but because of a person. So, they just needed to call some people who would help sort this all out. Besides, someone could be behind all of this. While he was saying this, suggesting that someone might be behind this whole story, someone in the background was spying. This was that boy who tried his luck attacking our main character's friend. He wonders how their plan would go. Their plan was going well, but then two people who were stronger from his team just raced up. He was surprised and quickly turns to ask who it was. He starts explaining that the two who defeated those were just ordinary students from this university. But digging a little deeper, he found something about our protagonist, Suang Vogo. Our hero, he was known as the weakest. However, he had a very powerful spiritual pressure. He should be a bit careful when encountering our protagonist. But on the other hand, he had something that could summon the captain of this entire team, and they would certainly need that captain to help defeat our protagonist. But the boy simply said he wouldn't do that. If he tried to, their captain would turn him into pieces. But he asks not to worry. He had been learning in this small school here about two people who would give them a hard time. Now, he could invade there alone because he would be able to complete their plan entirely. As long as they couldn't discover their real plan, if they did, they would be screwed. So, their main mission at the moment was to focus on something else, while their primary mission was to proceed with the plan they had in mind. Meanwhile, in another totally different place, we can see several dragons. There was a person, and that person was our protagonist, waiting for the right moment to attack. After waiting a bit, he manages to pull out that Oiteo, blasting away the monsters that were there. Then, after finding the monster's nest, the monsters start wanting to attack the elders. But they use the shield. While one uses the shield, the other defends. But the old man seems to want to join the fun. He prepares a punch, and with that punch, he hits one of the creatures right in the face, then knocks it down behind him. After stopping those creatures, they start thinking they need to get out of here before they can move forward. While they were thinking this in another entirely different place in the same school, we can see one of the students who ended up staying inside. In school, he tried to push that lizard away with a stick in his hand, but it didn't work at all. Because that lizard with agar, only he managed to break that stick into 3 pieces, leaving the creature even more scared. Just thinking about it, the monster wanted to send an F to him, but at that moment, that monster ends up being defeated by someone there. So he looks forward to see what happened. Looking, he sees 2 people in front of him, our protagonist and our Gazosa. He thanks our protagonist for saving him, but he didn't know who this guy was. He then begins to explain here, in the speech he made at the student presentation, that the memory of his entrance into this school made him really like our protagonist, making him his role model. But the story was a bit confusing, so he asks him to relax a bit. At this point, he asks why this guy was here, as they weren't supposed to be in this dormitory. He then reveals that he overslept a bit more than usual and ended up encountering this monster. So he just asks him to relax and follow him because they were going to leave this place. And so it's done. Leaving through there, they end up kind of meeting that portal there. They get a shock because there they can see a wave, a herd of monsters. Our protagonist asks the two to stay there because he would get closer to check things out. But before he can leave, our protagonist hands over the gun to our Gazosa, saying she would take care of it. So our protagonist approaches slowly to check things out. Getting closer, he asks these things not to wake up. If they did, it was an F. It seems that the portal placed there for some reason served basically to distract them. But there, while trying to see what was happening with the portal, another creature appears, and this one grabs our PRA. But our boy was quick. He dodged this very easily, jumping back. He now sees a dragon, a bit more tuned up. The creature had scales where you couldn't even see behind it. Our protagonist takes a shock, watching our protagonist now fighting this monster, but the others who were sleeping still haven't woken up. So it means he should end the fight much faster than he should. He clenches his fist with his hack to end the fight quickly, running towards it, trying to punch the thing, but his fist didn't even break the face of the lizard. Instead, the lizard counterattacks, throwing our protagonist against the wall, hard against the wall. We see both of them there, more scared than usual. Our protagonist stayed there, trying to figure out why his cultivation didn't have an effect on this monster, but he shouldn't panic. There was another place. We can see our Morina holding our protagonist's gun. She was ready to shoot. She then shoots, hitting that monster head on, but it didn't work. It didn't even make a scratch on that thing. She takes a shock, seeing that she couldn't harm the little monster. Our protagonist asks her to run, but it didn't work. That monster also runs towards her. But at that moment, our protagonist manages to grab the leg of that dragon. Holding its leg, he managed to stop that thing from biting her. Now he managed to use his hack with the hack in hand. Our protagonist pulls that thing with all his strength. Now he manages to throw that thing into the portal. Those monsters, who were all sleeping, wake up with the impact that happened, and they were ready to invade that portal to catch our protagonist. But our protagonist was fast. He closes that portal, not letting those monsters spill out. And before closing the portal, our protagonist wishes these creatures good luck. Maybe in the future, they would meet again, but now was not the time. The creature that let that guy escape is seen just growling up in sheer anger, but then in another place. We could already see that someone at another university was setting something up because, as he set it up, we saw him getting startled because behind him appeared some people wondering what he was doing there at that moment. He turns around, all tense. What appeared were just two professors, Professor Shengfeng and Shengel, who asked this guy if he was some kind of student at this school. But he turning with anger because he saw that every time he tried to do something, it always went wrong. Now that he stood up, the guys managed to see the mark on his neck, so they knew he wasn't a student. So they should tell the others that this guy must already be here. Since he's here, they should call the others. But in doing so, they also had to deal with him. He wouldn't allow those two to run. So, not allowing it, I just see that guy running towards him, but the two prepare and they end up combining one blow. That blow ends up coming his way, and everything freezes. He sees that if he doesn't defend against this, it'll go badly for him. There he realizes that the two were using some different kind of cultivation. This cultivation means you can share your cultivation with a friend, so the fight would be a bit riskier. However, this has a weakness. Their abilities were enhanced, like, 7 times more than they already were, so he had to watch his moves a bit. So, they jump on him, he dodges the first blow, but it doesn't help. Then they jump to the side to hit his neck, but he puts his arm in front. Just when he thought he managed to hold one off, another one appears from behind, pulling him back. He understands what happened but needs to dodge as the other is about to launch a heavy one at him. Dodging, he sees the other already planning the next move. This was a punch that would hit him squarely. And at that moment, he realizes he can't take any more because that cultivation he used tired him out a lot. But this was already enough. He tired the guy out too. He unleashes his final move that would end everything. But at that moment, he appears, the bald king, who sprouts in the middle of this fight, interrupting that guy's blow. After both glare at each other, he thinks not even twice about standing still. He imbues his hand, gripping that thing, preparing to attack this new opponent. So, he goes, but with just one move, the one the guy makes ends up sending him flying, dragging his companion who was beside him. He didn't like that. He goes all out against the bald king. But it didn't help, the guy prepared, stomping hard on the ground, bouncing off and sending that one flying too. After kicking that away, we see the background guy who was just getting beaten up until now. So, who was this bald king? He was just the captain of this crazy group here, but our scene cuts off there. This was our protagonist who finally managed to return everything to normal. The things that were all sealed disappeared there, the signal returned. So, he quickly sent a message to the other teachers to find out what they needed to do before doing anything else. But at the moment, the most important thing was to summon all the teachers to a certain place. He asked our bald guy here to inform Zin's group and Hash's group so they could immediately go to the spiritual tower to solve the problems there. So it's done. Then, at the spiritual energy collection tower, we can see some people gathered there. They were discussing what they needed to do. After discussing this and that, we return to the scene of those two there. They were fighting each other. One ends up saying that he failed a lot and didn't like it. But even failing, he still managed to plant the bombs. So, he says that if what he came up with didn't work, he won't forgive that guy again. He even makes a small threat, showing his determination to make sure. Now, our Cal King says that this time he won't accept any more excuses for them to easily get away. If failure happens, it will be the last mission that guy will have. At this point, he was about to send him flying but ends up ripping something off him. This thing he ripped off was something he had planned for a long time. He got tired of seeing his plans fail. The next day, in the men's dormitory, we can see some people walking around. But walking there, the teacher wonders where Lu was walking around. He didn't know, but he says that he met many lonely students in the dormitory building. That guy there was sort of guided to the exit. But the teacher wonders if our protagonist wasn't hurt, as he was in the middle of that fight with those monsters. At this moment, he says he's fine. They just found a portal under the dormitory building. But that thing under the dormitory disappeared, so everything returned to normal. However, he wonders about that portal. He thinks someone used spatial connection technology. He can't believe the frontline monsters appeared right inside the dormitory where they live. Since our boy managed to deal with those things, he says there are other urgent matters they need to attend to. He and the teacher will be going to a very important place. So, each of them follows a different path. Our protagonist goes somewhere else. He needed to protect the safe zone where they were. But before he can leave the dormitory, someone appears in the background. This was that kid over there. He wonders if a student in the refinement period of Iki would be able to defeat Arong there. But he doesn't believe it. He just wonders in his mind if our MC has that strength and all. So, he goes downstairs. The boy calls for our protagonist. Our protagonist sees him, and as he turns, he sees a boy calling for him. He wonders if our protagonist did something strange because he smelled like Wong. Our protagonist stops. He's curious to know who this guy is, as he had a dog's nose and could smell other things. But he wonders in his mind which of the two was the Ong there. Suddenly, that guy claps his palms together, and now he starts saying things would go his way. He's sort of getting revenge on his two. One of his most important companions, Akuel's aura, just seemed to be leaking everywhere he was. The boy asks us if he had the audacity to be there twice. Now he doesn't even have a choice. What he should be doing with our protagonist, he will have to take a massive F. But our protagonist wonders if he is from that organization. The boy doesn't answer. He just releases an enormous amount of power towards our prota. Our little guy freezes for a moment. This wasn't a ring but rather particles, and his own cultivation doesn't allow our protagonist to even take a step forward. However, the spiritual power of cultivation of each person has a unique smell. This also comes from the factor of the person, whether they train normally or hard. Because like this kid in front of you, his physical training is good, so his spiritual power has increased significantly, allowing the cultivator to have more advantage in battle. One of his most loyal companions told him his muscular body was the advantage. But that had nothing to do with this, as our protagonist still sends a F to him. But now he ends up inhaling that entire RCK that was around there. Then he fully understands the cultivation of our MC. Now he would be finishing off our little guy in this moment. Then he starts attacking our hero. Our hero tries to understand what is happening. He can't move and then also receives several blows. But amidst all this cultivation, our little guy keeps wondering how that boy over there can see our protagonist here in this totally reddened mist. However, that boy wouldn't allow our protagonist time to think about a way out of this dust he himself put here. He then attacks our PR, and our hero receives a solid punch to the face, which sends him back just a little. Now our hero lying on the ground thinks that if he continues to be beaten just a little bit more, he will slowly lose. So he thinks he should do the same thing that boy did. What the boy did was simply smell anything, the smell of a flower or a common guy. Well, he does that too, but to be able to smell things, he needed to remember the shapes of things. Then he remembers that he was in an enclosed mountainous area, and around there were plenty of flowers, which would help him a lot. So, after trying a bit, he can't do it. But the second time, he does it, he takes a deep breath, and a cultivation circle is formed around him. Our prota ends up sucking all the air around him. Now our little guy can also smell everything. The boy there, seeing our protagonist do the same crazy thing he did, is surprised. He just saw our protagonist flying up high, but our hero didn't care about what the boy was about to do next because he can now smell things. Now he's screwed because even he is surprised to find out that our protagonist discovered his true technique. But now our prota cultivates again in front of him. He crosses his arms and emanates a quite strong power. Then, after doing this, he throws it out. Those things fly out in the shape of needles. But this wouldn't be allowed to hit that boy. The kid makes a shield, but it doesn't work. That shield that was there is easily broken, and that ends up piercing more than expected. A sieve, and maybe the boy over there turned into more than a sieve. Between the boy and the sieve, I say our guy ended up victorious. This was our protagonist. Our guy wondered what he did again. He easily defeated another guy from this organization last time. He managed to find some really good stuff among the things of those guys he defeated, so he wanted to do the same this time. So, he digs through their stuff but finds nothing but a crystal. He wanted to test what it was to find out if it's worth it. So, digging here and there, he only finds a feature, something like a flame form, and it turns into that. In front of him, a hologram appears showing where they were programming everything. There was a small bomb that would self-destruct. This was the spiritual energy collection tower, and it showed exactly where the device was placed. We can already see that figure, not so much of a figure, walking around. He was unlucky because he just ran into one of the directors of this business. But he was luckier today because he was disguised. However, he thought she would be smart and not fall for his tricks. But no, when he tried to deceive her, he ends up saying he feels pain right here. She approaches to see the big figure's pain, but it's at this moment he pulls out a .38, and you know the damage it can do, right? Yes, she was taken aback, and as she was taken aback, she takes a hit in the middle of all this. The guy smirks a bit crazily, saying, well, that's literally an F. A bit embarrassed, she falls a bit stiffly. He celebrates his trick here. It always works, especially with this person. So, he just touched a sore spot for her. Now he was ready, yes, ready to catch another sucker who came around trying to find out what was going on with this school. And yes, there was another guy around. But at this moment, he needed to hide because he needed his soap opera acting skills. He runs to a corner, and in this corner, we see his next victim, wondering what went wrong earlier. He had talked to a teacher, but suddenly she stopped responding. Here we see him with his macabre smile, thinking he finally found his next victim, or not. Right? As soon as he saw the teacher, the boy emerges from the smoke behind, using his soap opera acting, asking the teacher to save him. But the teacher looks at him with a cold gaze. He wouldn't be as foolish as the other to fall for tricks so easily. He thought for a moment because he had just given an order for all students to go to the dormitory, which meant something was wrong. But still, he approaches to see what's happening with this possible student of his. As he gets closer, he opens his jacket and pulls out his .38. He realizes his mistake, but it's too late. The guy already has his gun pointed at him. With that aimed at him, he fires a shot, but it's at this moment our old man activates his shield. His shield was powerful, one of the strongest in the world. But right there, using that almost strongest shield in the world, he got a big surprise. That thing cracked. After this, the bullet goes through it. He's surprised and wonders how such a defense could be broken by such a simple bullet. But as he veered off, he just ran towards his opponent to land a powerful punch on. He then reaches his side, landing a punch on him. After receiving this punch, the guy goes stiff, falling hard on the ground amidst the smoke. Amidst this chaos, he ends up encountering a new problem. At this point, he retrieves a flute that was stored with him. Our villain had chosen the second floor as his target, aiming to find a school where only weak teachers were present. However, he didn't have much luck. Everywhere he went, this creature was after him. But now he's putting an end to this game. Will he fight or just keep running? He swallows some kind of slime, and with that slime in his mouth, the kid ends up vomiting it out, saying he won't be fighting against him now.
This was unfair. The guy was strong and had already completed what he wanted. Now he just needed to escape, but at the moment he thought about fleeing, an intimidating look appeared behind him. He froze. Then a chain appeared. The one who appeared was a new teacher, who used a skill called slavery chain. The chain went towards our villain and wrapped around him. He looked up and saw her, but she also looked down at him. Now that she saw him, she wrapped everything around him, but he only thought about one thing: running. However, she wouldn't allow him to run. Professor Ceng wouldn't allow him to escape completely, so she grabbed the chain and pulled it up, throwing the guy towards her. He didn't think that would be good for him. She jumped from where she was and said she finally got him. Now she would have her revenge. She kicked him in the face, and he fell hard on the ground. But that wasn't enough. He could still escape. So, she put her legs up and was about to fall on him when she landed, getting closer to our villain who was already dust on the ground. She almost ended it. Thinking it was almost over, she thought so, and landed another kick in the guy's mouth. Looking down, she still thought it wasn't over. The guy grabbed his gun, intending to shoot her, but she dodged and then kicked him again, this time a little harder, and you could even hear something breaking. However, this wasn't enough for her. She still wanted revenge on that somewhat dumb teacher who easily fell for that guy's trick. She wanted to finish him off. Then another teacher appeared, stopping her from proceeding with it. He said he still needed to do some things with him. He had some information that needed to be taken. Before she could do anything else, he agreed to leave him alive for a few minutes. So, after leaving the old man alive, approached him, where he grabbed the gun he was using to do the stuff to people. He realized that this thing created by some power, its spiritual energy couldn't compare, but he realized that organization, numerous weapons, they could fight against them. Difficulty. Took out his phone with that dial, called some teachers. The stadium, the system, something was hit. Only sudden ends up some things. What he noticed most was that this thing seemed to be some explosive devices. But to understand one of these things here, we need to go back a few days. Today, the students should be learned. He worked the structure of those stops that make kaboom there. The teacher will be giving an example to our protagonist. He asks him to stand up if he would go to the front when breaking the wires. Make sure basically to be disconnecting the wires so that in the end, the kaboom that happens, right? Thus he explains that before the energy could pass everywhere, you should never be removing the neutral wire. This was something that was not good. Our PR unintentionally ended up removing. He asks what would happen next. He, with a bigger smile than mine, comments that inadvertently there was an accident there. He cut the wrong wire. The neutral wire he ended up breaking, and the wire that was supposed to cut ended up leaving it there only by doing this when breaking the neutral wire. An overload occurs, then developing a small cabin in the mirror of the room, scaring everyone. Everyone runs but there. Who runs the most is also our protagonist, because behind the teacher gets upset, behind him wanting to catch our own, but then he ends up kind of explaining again to our protagonist which wire he should be removing first. Before that, there would be a big kaboom. But before, he didn't pay enough attention in the class, so he should just be following his intuition, he thinks. But he should also be trusting his teacher, because the guy knew about these things. But from another place, a point was shown on the map. But the point was our protagonist there, where our PTE was. But those things began to inhabit more and more. The guy who watched this was surprised. He wondered why Shingu was in this place, where the kaboom was kind of planted. But hours later, we returned to our protagonist. Our protagonist managed to dismantle everything from there. Now that those things were completely dismantled, he should be running to the next place, so he takes that crystal that was in his hand, then ends up checking certain things there. But there, I opened that thing, something appeared saying that our protagonist should keep 55M away from that place where he was. He should get out of here. Well, unfortunately, this was already late. So as it was late, our hero simply thinks of something and throws it all on the ground, and then ends up jumping in the middle of the bushes. Our protagonist only thinks about hiding here. He only thinks that no one arriving there would see him there. Comes our bald king. But our bald king realized that Shinan wasn't around here. So he wonders, who was the guy who was around here? But looking down, he ends up finding the remains of those disarmed bombs there. Our bald king was angry with the guy who did this, but looking down, he finds someone hiding. And he didn't like that this guy disarmed what he armed, but he will be ending our protagonist now, since he also ended his plan. And he also asks not to blame him for what he'll be doing with the guy now here. And at this point, our protagonist mastered the ability to stay so incredibly still that he can even become invisible. Unfortunately, this ability did not last even 2 hours, because the guy quickly discovered him. Upon discovering, the bald king launches a cutting ray at him. He opens his eyes, so he sees that in his direction comes with a speed, a kind of aura kind of assassin that even has ground making in that place. A small explosion flying several things up. Our PR ends up landing already next to the Limezo. He ends up thinking that if he took just a little longer to dodge that blow, he might not be alive anymore. But now he faces that opponent of his. He chips in the face of our protagonist, who he would be from where our protagonist sprouted. Our protagonist says he just found that token there on the ground, and out of nowhere, He ended up picking it up. He thought of returning it to the owner too, but as he couldn't find an owner, unfortunately it would be... There was only one exclusive touch for each person in that organization. As now he had a touch of it, he would have to send our protagonist flying upwards. So, looking with the intention of already launching his attack at him, our protagonist managed to notice before that burst of activity could hit him, dodging to the side. Our protagonist was surprised that even with his speed, he couldn't completely dodge that blow. The tips of his hair ended up singed since he managed to lie down almost on top of our protagonist. He realized that he advanced towards the golden elixir, or something more. He was surprised that this little kid not only had not even the weakest power of refinement, but also how he managed to dodge his attack. Furthermore, people knew him as the weakest guy. And how did he manage to defeat him? Well, he would find out for himself. He runs towards him, already preparing a new attack. This was just the beginning. Now it will truly begin. He kicks our protagonist upwards. Our protagonist only sees that kick coming closer and closer to him. He couldn't dodge, causing that blow to hit our protagonist squarely. In order not to be completely caught by this blow, he only used his arms, but even so, he received a good blow. He was then thrown back. The trees that were in the way were torn down one by one. After all this, our protagonist fell to the ground, holding his mouth. Something slightly reddish came out. He thought his body hurt. He thought his body was crumbling, but he didn't have time to recover or think about what he was doing because the guy had already appeared in front of him, ready to launch him upwards. But before he could do that, he laughs at our protagonist and says that this was the power that would be enough to send our protagonist flying upwards. Our protagonist didn't deserve so much attention after all. After all, he was only at the refinement cultivation level of Kefrago. It seems he launched at that kid with everything he had towards our protagonist. The kid received a good blow, and the guy laughed at him. The masochist, this bald king even said that if he was enjoying that sensation, our PR, I don't know. But the kid screamed. But while this was happening, he already managed to defeat our protagonist. But however, the blow that struck our protagonist had an effect on his hands. Our protagonist's bones were somewhat strong, like steel. His hands hurt. But as he defeated him now, he would take what was there, literally grabbing it. He would say that it was quite easy to defeat our protagonist, but he wonders how he managed to defeat his other companions. Problem solved. He was the one who defeated his companions. So following the path, our protagonist ends up kind of grabbing a stone. With that in hand, he ends up thinking about striking him, but then he realizes that our protagonist has not yet been launched upwards. He was resistant. He liked that, but our PR ends up saying that it's not over yet. He won't allow him to escape easily without being able to retaliate. But as a student of this school, he recognizes his strength. He simply shows this thing in the middle and says that it wasn't worth fighting against our protagonist, and so he starts mocking our protagonist, what he was doing with that little stone in his hand, but our protagonist doesn't care about what he was mocking him for. He simply takes that stone and throws it at his face, but the stone has no effect. He grabs that stone, but that wasn't enough. He runs towards him. He ends up realizing and looking to the side. He sees our protagonist making the turns. His method was a bit crazy because he was running crazy in front and then running behind. That's how it's done. Now behind our bald king. Our big guy grabs onto your waist, but ends up grabbing onto himself and then pushing himself back. Our protagonist tackles him hard to the ground, causing it to crack a little. But in that moment, as the dust was rising, we already see someone rising amidst it. This was our Calvo King, who says it wasn't long ago that he found a worthy opponent. The guy even says the same thing, admitting he struggled to find someone like our protagonist. So he's ready to have maximum fun now. Now here comes a strong wave, but he's already running towards our protagonist, who is also getting ready. He uses cultivation in his hand to confront him once and for all. Meanwhile, as the fight unfolds in the martial arts training field, some teachers are wondering what he's doing, but he changes the subject, asking where he put those bombs in this place. He answers, interrupting the guy, saying it doesn't matter what he says from now on. His plan has already been completed anyway. All that's left now is to wait for that kaboom moment. The tower exploding here was impossible. But the guy starts laughing, knowing common teachers couldn't keep up with his plan. And he won't be buried alone here by this explosion. Furthermore, what he did was a small demonstration of the power of the organization he belongs to, but this only irritates him more. He steps on our villain, who, after being trampled by him, is stopped because the situation in the tower is now quite dangerous. But minutes before, another teacher asked someone to visit and check the inside of the energy towers to see if anything was wrong. And in this case, the only way was to ensure the explosives of this school were placed on the outside. If they were placed on the inside, they would discover it much faster. But he sticks close to our villain and asks again where they placed the explosives. It would be better to say where it was, or something bad would happen, but he doesn't care. His plan has already been put into action, and everything he planned won't be wasted by the teachers. However, just as he was about to reveal some important parts of his plan, an explosion in the background grabs their attention. They comment that all this power was from his master, who was already at the stage of golden elixir, something no one could surpass. But in the safe zone of the high school, we can see some things happening. Among the people hiding, we see two of them discussing the problems outside. They say there's no need to worry, because there are many strong people outside taking care of the situation. But our brunette isn't pleased with this. She remembers our protagonist saying he was going to a dangerous area where people were. Our protagonist said he would return to that area, which piques her curiosity. She calls him to see if everything is okay, but he doesn't answer, and suddenly the phone is disconnected. The number she dialed isn't available, leaving her scared. She thinks our protagonist is in a bad situation and considers leaving her safe place to approach him and mess things up. But after stopping and thinking, she hesitates. He runs over there and she even says she wouldn't let anything happen to our protagonist. But meanwhile, we fly back to the battlefield. Our protagonist once again ended up being knocked to the ground. And here comes the part where no matter what kind of combat experience he had, the strength between them was different, and he was no match for him. But at this moment, our Sea King felt that his body was acting differently, like that moment when he fights and feels all the energy of the combat, something he hadn't felt in years. So he asks our guy to return to the place where he was, and there, if he manages to survive, they could be fighting. And seeing that our protagonist had a heck of a potential, he said it was worth going back, but he said it wasn't worth it. He wanted to stay here. He wanted to face this guy. So, since he said he was a match for him, he asks to try, because no cultivator in the world has tried and failed to hit him. Until just at this moment, our door trembles. The explosions were something that caught the attention of the teachers more, so no one would come here to help him. And at this moment, our bald king approached our guy more, and the director should basically be coming here to try to help him hold this thing. But that wouldn't happen. But suddenly something happens. A bright light appears from the background, catching the attention of our bald king. He quickly turns around, and what appeared from behind our bald king was simply something that our protagonist made. It ended up distracting him a little, but by distracting him for this little bit, our protagonist managed to strike. This strike was to activate this light. With this activated light, he managed to gather all the teachers and also all the directors in this place, everything in one place. So our head teacher says that he could surrender and be captured. Furthermore, he should surrender because there was a greater reason for this. His companions were all defeated. Furthermore, one of his companions betrayed him shamelessly. This guy here was this guy there, but suddenly he starts to say it's a lie. They just used some kind of technique to prevent him from continuing to lie. But our bald king didn't want to understand, and didn't want to understand what was going on. So he gets furious, saying that trash like them shouldn't be his companions anyway. Since everyone is here, he just thinks he's leaving this place. But they wouldn't allow it. At this moment, he ends up locking up. His body was basically out of control. He ends up falling to his knees. Something red comes out from within him, but at this moment, he has a memory of our guy from the fight he had with him there. Our prota managed to land a good blow on our bald king. But at this moment, one of the teachers suddenly pops up beside him, and the other one appears in front of him, hitting our bald king square in the face. The other one in front of him also managed to hit more than just a blow, a heavy one in his face. The guy was thrown against the wall while that one was thrown against the wall. We see this teacher commenting that our protagonist has evolved a lot, while she praised our guy. We see our guy thinking that the legs of Teacher Lun were quite long. Meanwhile, we have that guy there coming out of the smoke. He says that their organization was not weak, and they always find a way to defeat people like this. Here in his hand was the detonation device. He presses it. Now he says everyone would see the power of their organization. They all freeze, and the guy starts laughing. But from afar, nothing happens. Waiting a little longer, still nothing happens. So he starts looking more closely at that flask there. He realizes that it's a bit damaged, and at that moment, he remembers that our protagonist managed to disarm it all, because at school, our protagonist had a... He said he might be facing everyone by himself, but at that moment, out of nowhere, his childhood friend appears, wondering from the middle of nowhere if he was okay and what happened. But our prota asks her to go back, and furthermore, he couldn't go back a little earlier due to some small events. However, he tells her to go back quickly because it was very dangerous here. But no, she said she was fine, but that guy starts laughing a little louder, and people ask what he was laughing at. He failed, and what did he have up his sleeve now? The old man wonders, so he ends up saying what day it was, because before he could plan all this, He set something up back there before, which he set up. He couldn't even figure out what he was scared of. He simply asks her to look back, and looking back, we see that our villain suddenly turned into something a bit ugly out of nowhere. His body ended up being burned. Ends up saying there he would basically be exploding himself if he touched alcohol. At this point, that guy runs towards that girl who should have stayed behind. As she couldn't dodge it, our protagonist did her a favor. Our Proto ran towards her and gave her a tight hug. Our Sea King simply gets surprised and can't believe our Proto would do that. Our Proto grabs him and runs towards her. He wouldn't screw himself alone. He wanted to take someone with him too. He told him to stay away from him, but it didn't help. No, he just grabbed our villain's wig, and then grabbing his wig, he just threw it with all his strength towards our Sea King. The teachers just simply grabbed the girl who just wanted to suddenly go out to help our Proto, but as it was late, that thing ends up exploding. But before it could explode once and for all, the teachers end up setting up a kind of shield, but our Sea King just asks for that to get away from him because he didn't want anyone near him. His target was not him, but our protagonist. But it didn't help. The celestial position was ready. This was the shield, the spiritual energy formation that was supposed to protect everyone, but it was made there. And then a certain kaboom happens outside, and they end up being protected while our Proto and the others received all the damage from that. And from afar, someone was also watching all this happening, and in this tower, we already see our gas girl taking some reports with that brother. She ends up saying that in Sector 6, there was a kind of kaboom happening in the middle of that place. However, the explosions were having a kind of effect, an explosion of spiritual energy. And specifically there next to him, which is Sector 6, has a kind of reach, if by chance this happened, an explosion of 100 M. And for some reason, their location is the maximum there that was 100 M away from that place. And it just seems that someone was intervening in all this stuff so that these explosions wouldn't happen. But if by any chance the explosion happened, they end up measuring it with a certain level. If it's level 1, it was almost acceptable. They managed to solve this problem there. But however, the level 9 explosion poses a greater risk to everyone. And for some reason, it showed more 9s. So since the explosion was happening, it was due to this organization that a few days ago was basically getting into several risky places, attracting a lot of attention. So he just thinks about leaving, but is going to the school where our protagonist and the others are in the middle of that event, while the old man comes to this place here, right there, where that was happening. All that we can see the damage after that, after a smoke dissipated there, we see the two fallen on the ground. The two were totally destroyed. Even a strong person at the nascent soul stage couldn't be able to survive an explosion of this height. The guy cried. Our gas girl here also cried, and know that our protagonist was dragged up, only that suddenly, right there in the middle of that smoke, someone starts screaming saying that he was fine, nothing happened to him. The kid even laughs with a smile to affirm that he is fine, yes. But it didn't help, no. The guy ends up closing his eyes and then he falls hard on the ground. People quickly rush around him to help. Our protagonist asks him not to die so soon, so he wouldn't be dying so quickly here. He ends up sort of using the cultivation type there, and with that, he can check the main points from there, allowing that not to interfere with his now healed body, basically. Someone already appears, flies in with a sword, looks around. There appears a gaseous figure wearing a kind of neighbor's school uniform. This was the principal, with some executors just by his side there to support him while the principal of this school approached the others. We see them there, discussing things. One of these things was that he took too long to come here to help them, so he ends up apologizing for simply being a little late. But now he sort of showed up, but we ended up kind of neglecting a little bit. He says that even neglecting, they managed to sort of use his team to their advantage. But now the guy notices something different there. He ends up realizing that now the guy who attacked this place was not simply an ordinary guy or figures on top of a strong guy. So he approaches those two who were just dust on the ground. Our old man didn't want to take credit for everything here. He ends up commenting that who defeated this guy was actually our protagonist. The two behind him are surprised. But who was more surprised was the old man, who wonders how it was possible for a guy, a common student in basic refinement, to defeat something that was vastly larger than him. So knowing that this kid has tremendous potential, he wouldn't allow him to be totally erased here. And at this point, he ended up using his cultivation on the boy, asking him to get up at once or else open his eyes. Our protagonist ends up seeing the old man behind, but what he sees most there was just a trail behind the old man. This thing that glowed caught his attention a lot, but he didn't know who this old man was. He didn't know. He just said the old man there had a bit of freckles on his face, so he should take care of his face a little more or something like that. From the head of the 7 leaves of these leaves, Fruits are born with the fruits you can get power from. This power arises crops that allow the person to become stronger. But this cultivation needs to be taught. Beginners like our protagonist should be obeying this guy who was at the top peak now from what he said. But our main character didn't understand only that here, so our protagonist ends up understanding the words used there as fruit are meant as the top of the peak. What does this mean? He was at the top of everything. So then, by saying these beautiful and good words, the old man understands that this girl had her words understood well what he was saying. But therefore the answer was not, that if you try to lie or say something true in front of him, he won't forgive it much. So he approaches our prota, now close. He asks our protagonist if it was him who managed to defeat those two guys there, lying on the ground. He said he wouldn't lie, and by then he would have to lie to an elderly gentleman. The old man then, after receiving his answer, realizes that our protagonist wasn't lying, even though he wasn't. And since he wasn't then, he would just remove some stuff from there. Those things are those figures that our protagonist ended up defeating. He just wanted to take that to take a closer look. But from there, our protagonist ends up wondering to this old man by his side what it was that those guys were using. His answer was well answered. This thing was simply something that collected very valuable information. There only the old man himself can see what was happening in the middle. That fight our guy had with him, using those techniques and skills he's been honing firsthand, he managed to witness the whole protagonist versus that guy's showdown and its outcome. But what struck him the most was the part where our protagonist had a real equal match. However, it didn't end well because the spell he cast on his own ally backfired. The guy got a hefty F. But now that he's realized what's been going on, he just needs to take the body for some tests. So, he asks her to just take them to a specific spot. She stays there, in the background, while the director calls out to our fizzy drink, telling her to take our protagonist to a somewhat safe place where he could rest, also to measure his new powers. She simply obeys. Our protagonist ends up grabbing her, and she takes him somewhere. But as they head to that certain place, she asks some questions, and our guy just answers. From then on, he starts following the path with her. But before he could fully proceed, our protagonist mutters some things, annoying her a bit. She wants to know what he's muttering about, not wanting to speak in the background. He doesn't believe our protagonist is still in the refining period of Basic K, even though it's quite interesting. As time passes, 3 days later, we see that event happening again. Here, he asks everyone to gather in one place because now that event that was supposed to have started before is starting now. He just asks everyone to gather in one place. There's a rumor that something happened to those people those schools, sort of defeated by a certain person. This person wasn't a high-ranking guy or someone strong. Yes, it was someone from their own school. They like to talk about how incredibly strong the person who defeated that guy there was. But the old guy interrupts their chats because it's not the time to talk. Now he explains what they should be doing. He starts explaining things that no one liked to hear, but he ends up saying the second thing. Everyone quiets down and listens. It's about the person he's going to reveal who defeated that evil organization. So they start mentioning a name. Our protagonist, that little red one, doesn't believe our protagonist was the one who contributed a lot to that school. And because of this, he already got a first-hand spot in the best university in that place. Everyone around wanted to have the luck our protagonist had, but unfortunately they didn't. So they had to suffer a little to get through it. But in the background, our fizzy drink appears, congratulating our protagonist. Now he's part of a university that's also prestigious. Throughout, our protagonist just says that all this time he only had luck, but it wasn't just luck because our protagonist also got something else. Our fizzy drink. They get interrupted. Thing there ends up calling for our protagonist. He couldn't believe our protagonist could be entering that university. The bald guy always believed in him, so now that he believes, our guy must move forward. But even though he's qualified for that recommendation now, he shouldn't be kind of scared because the cultivators in that place are just a little stronger. He needs to be a little more careful. So now that he's passed, he won't have to take the test just now. So now the teachers and everyone else ask him to be. He returned home where he could rest at will. So the night falls in a completely different place, and we can already see our protagonist there. He ends up kind of getting into his bathtub, where he celebrates that he finally managed to go through everything, and now he could enjoy the vacation he had there. But there he was, thinking of a method to build a kind of cultivation base only. Suddenly, the doorbell of his house rings, and he wonders who could be crazy at this moment here. So, he simply dresses up and goes to the door. Upon arriving at the door, he is faced with this beauty. So curious to know who the guy was at this good moment this night here. He asks who this person is, and she reveals herself as a professor. At this moment, he opens the door trying to understand what happened. Why is she here tonight, at his door, in his house? Suddenly, she says that the director asked her to contact him to deliver something to him. Now, our protagonist remembers some lines from the director that he asked our protagonist not to go to the director because if he went to him, something good certainly wouldn't be happening to our protagonist. So he would only be giving some extra tasks to our protagonist, now understanding. He asks her to come back the next day because now his body was a little sore. And besides, he wasn't in the mood to do these extra missions. No, he was in the mood to rest for another day, but she wouldn't allow it. She puts her foot down, and with a single push, she crosses her leg in front of our protagonist's door. If he doesn't want to let her in, she'll force her way in. Even seeing that the worst could happen, he simply lets her in. So she delivers a letter of acceptance to the university he wanted to attend. Our protagonist then takes that letter, he opens it to read, but she says there's a small problem. This small problem is a request that university gave him. This thing was simple. Our protagonist could go to an underground guild where he would have battlefield experience. Our protagonist then can hear this. He simply freezes, holding on to that, but not believing it. He still stood still. He wasn't ready because he ended up discovering that the so-called underground guild is an organization feared for its location, which is in a totally dangerous place on the border of beasts, where extremely strong monsters live among themselves. However, there are also some guys who, in his view, are a little strong. These end up kind of plotting things against the weaker ones, who rule there are the strongest, or even you who have a guild or money. You could live until they're, well, but you have to be careful with those who live behind. These are the ones that get you the most behind. Among these, there's a kind of guy there very famous. They end up capturing those who in their view were good, but were on their tail, and he doesn't like that. However, if he went to this dangerous place, he wouldn't even have a chance to survive. If he went to a university, our protagonist had a much better chance of surviving. So he puts that letter on the table and starts saying that he could ask the director to change the location of this thing. Moreover, he managed for the first time to find a way to get into this university. But at this point, she ends up taking something there and starts to say so that she couldn't worry because he had something in his hand that could be helping our protagonist, because knowing that it was a place quite dangerous. She already had something in hand to be giving that support to our buddy on the table. She tosses a pill that, if by chance he takes it, he could recover completely his power, and also his strength. And on the other side, there was an armor that could withstand any kind of cultivation from anyone. But considering he was already at a much higher level than she thought, he could already be dealing with several people. In our protagonist's mind, there were two voices. One wanting to grab it, and the other not wanting to. She was like temptation. But our prota still refuses. This thing she put in front of our prota was quite valuable, so she simply asks him to keep it for himself. Then she plays her last card. This thing is a black card of ultimate limitation. If he wants to have much higher access in this guild, he just needs to show this card to them, and he'll have the freedom to walk around this place for no reason at all. Whether he wants it or not, he just needs to take this thing in front of him. Our protagonist looks for the first time, tempted to accept. But in his view, it was better for her to keep it. Someone inferior like him shouldn't be getting such a valuable card. And moreover, this card wasn't something that could be given to just anyone. But still, she appears in front of our protag and keeps asking him to accept it. He couldn't refuse. It's a unique proposal. Besides being unique, our protagonist, on this little journey he will have the opportunity to meet someone who could help him break through the basic refining period. And he could do cultivation like her, creating snow out of nowhere. Several things start to fly around. Her spiritual energy was so pure that when the right time comes, our protagonist would be able to do the same spiritual movement. She realizes that our protagonist has a lot of spiritual energy within him, but he doesn't know how to use it. He could eventually learn how to use it to his advantage, creating snow or melting snow easily. She starts explaining that our prot's spiritual energy is like a ball stored in a totally withered place. But if he takes it right, he could master that ball as she is doing, setting fire to her hand. Before she came, she was quite surprised to learn that our protagonist always managed to be first in all tests, no matter what. But in her view, this wasn't something that would allow our protagonist to evolve much faster. He was in a totally comfortable place to break or achieve something much superior. A stronger power was needed. Living the basic danger that speeds up the heart, however, if he accepts going there, he wouldn't need to worry because there were even several powerful people by his side who could protect them from other things. So all he had to do was trust her. He didn't trust her that much since she almost set fire to his house. But still, it was something our protagonist should think a little bit about. If he accepts, he will already be getting an unlimited resource. This may be the main reason our protagonist hasn't been able to move on from the basic refining stage until now, so she continues to exist. If he doesn't want to go with her, it was basically refusing the card, and refusing everything that was there. She would leave, but before she left, she would take it to go away. Our protagonist's hand there in the middle, and says he thought a lot. Yes, he will accept this proposal, even though the thing ahead will be a bit risky. But, however, and regretting the case, this is how we will end this video. But if you liked it, leave a, if you want the continuation, leave your comment below. And remember, it's very good that the lazy soul wants everything, but achieves nothing.